Join me, if you dare, as we discover Whitby, a town where shadows cling to narrow cobbled streets and where one of the greatest horror legends of all time was brought to life. Whitby isn't just the real home of Dracula, it's a place alive with ghost stories. From a monk cursed to roam the Abbey ruins, to the cries of a nun bricked alive centuries ago. Tonight, we'll uncover the dark secrets of Whitby, from the harbour where Dracula landed, through its haunted streets, and up to the Abbey itself that inspired Bram Stoker. In Whitby, the dead don't always stay buried.
Hi guys, welcome to Whitby, the Yorkshire seaside town that gave birth to the world's most famous vampire. Back in the summer of 1890, Irish writer Bram Stoker came here for a break. He checked into a guest house on Royal Crescent, and each morning he wandered down into town. But what he found wasn't just sea air, it was inspiration. The ruined Abbey looming over the cliffs, the stormy harbour below, the graveyard with its bats and weathered graves, even the black jet jewellery in shop windows, all of it began to shape a story. Stoker arrived here with a character called Count Vampire, but he left with Dracula. Today, we'll follow that dark path from the beach to the cobbled streets, into the ghost stories of Whitby, and finally inside the Abbey itself, where legends and hauntings still linger. This is the Bram Stoker's memorial bench. At this very spot in 1890, Bram would sit taking in these very same views, the views that fueled his sinister imagination. Take a moment to sit out and look at the panorama. You are seeing the world through Bram Stoker's eyes. Welcome to the historic Whitby Harbour. The air here is thick with the scent of salt and the cries of ghouls, but a far darker history swirls beneath the surface of these restless waters. We're standing here on the very edge of the North Sea, where the tide whispers secrets against the old stone piers. It was here, in the autumn of 1890, when Bram Stoker was on holiday in Whitby, he was captivated by the town. While he was here, Stoker heard stories of a Russian schooner, the Demeter, which ran aground on this very beach below the cliffs 5 years prior. Stoker, a keen listener, filed away this real-life tragedy, and it became the inspiration for the Demeter, the very ship that carried Count Dracula to England. In Stoker's novel, the Demeter arrives in a ferocious storm, a derelict ghost ship with only a single dark coffin in its hold. A massive spectral dog is described as leaping from the vessel and running up this very beach. And so, this very harbour, this tangible connection to the sea, became the gateway for a creature of pure evil. They say that on stormy nights, you can sometimes hear the ghostly creak of Demeter's mast and a low guttural growl carried on the wind, a terrifying echo of the monster that came ashore and forever bound this town to the legend of the vampire. Dracula, in the form of that black dog, leapt from the ship across the beach and bounded up here, the 199 steps. Stoker describes locals watching in shock as a black beast vanished into the shadows above. Isn't it crazy to think Stoker himself climbed these very steps? You can literally walk up here in the same footsteps as a horror icon. They say if you count these steps both on the way up and on the way down, you'll always get a different number. But luckily, if you miscount, there's some handy Roman numerals to help you keep track. If you were rich when you died, you could afford a horse and cart to carry your coffin up this cobbled path alongside. But if you were unfortunately poor, your coffin would have to be carried up. Many a coffin is said to have been dropped on the way up, leading them to smash and for the bodies of their dearly departed to tumble back down. On the way you'll notice some benches you can sit on, but they weren't originally meant for sitting on. They're called coffin benches and were actually used to rest coffins on the way up to St Mary's Church. At the top of these crumbling stone steps sits St Mary's Churchyard, a place Bram Stoker knew intimately, where he would walk, his mind consumed by shadows and his pen ready to capture them. He often stood here gazing out at the skeletal ruins of the Abbey and a churning, hungry sea below, the very air thick with the scent of salt and decay. It was in this very place that he entombed his characters Lucy Westenra and Mina Murray, a literary curse laid upon this sacred ground. Stoker's words bleed into reality here as he describes the gravestones as if they were tumbling into the sea. Look closer and you'll find that the names on these weathered stones weren't just for show. Stoker plucked them from the very earth they now rest in, giving them new, horrifying life as the victims of his fiend. If you dare to walk this hallowed ground yourself, seek out the headstone of Swales, the name that inspired Dracula's first victim. Whitby Abbey was first founded in the 7th century, destroyed by Vikings, rebuilt in the 13th century, and now stands as one of the most atmospheric ruins in the whole of England, and it's not without its own fair share of ghost stories. Locals tell the bone-chilling tale of Constance de Beverley, a young nun at Whitby Abbey who broke the most sacred of vows. She fell in love with a gallant knight and abandoned her vow of chastity to be with him, but the affair ended in betrayal when he cast her aside in favour of another. When her fellow sisters discovered her transgression, the punishment was swift and merciless. Constance was condemned to the most chilling fate imaginable. She was bricked up alive within these abbey walls, left to perish slowly in the darkness. It's said her screams echoed for days, muffled behind the stone before fading into silence. Centuries later, her restless spirit is said to roam the abbey ruins, her cries carried on the wind that whips across the headland. Visitors claim to hear the wailing on stormy nights, and some swear they've seen the figure of a weeping woman drifting through the shadows. Constance, forever mourning her lost love and eternal entrapment. Another legend goes, a beautiful young nun was in love with a sailor. Their love forbidden, they knew they couldn't be together, so they planned to elope. Her lover was said to meet her in a carriage pulled by 2 horses just below the cliffs of the Abbey to take her away. On the night of their escape, a thick fog rolled in, making it impossible to see. As her lover rode toward their rendezvous point, his carriage was struck by a powerful gust of wind, or perhaps it was a malevolent curse from the Abbey. The force so strong it sent the carriage, the horses and the sailor himself hurtling over the edge of the cliff. All were killed in the fall. The tragedy didn't end there. The nun, who had been waiting for him, saw the horrific crash. She was so heartbroken, she leapt from the same cliff. Now, on nights when the fog is thick and the moon is full, the ghost of the headless coachman and his 2 headless horses are said to ride along the cliffs of Whitby, forever bound to their tragic destiny. It's said if you can hear the phantom hooves on the ancient stones, you should quickly get out of the way, as it's an omen of a lost soul forever searching for a love that was tragically lost. Another eerie legend tells of a Whitby monk who strayed from his vows and betrayed his order. The punishment was as dramatic as it was cruel.
He was condemned to be dragged to death by wild horses, and according to the tale, his body was torn and battered as animals thundered across the Abbey grounds, leaving him in agony among the stones. But death wasn't the end of his torment. Locals say his spirit still haunts the ruins, forever tormented. On stormy nights, the sound of hooves can be heard pounding across the broken walls, sometimes accompanied by the distant rattle of chains. Whitby is full of scary narrow passageways and cobbled streets, shrouded in darkness at night, each of them with their own stories to tell, but none quite as many as that as Grape Lane. On a sunny afternoon, it looks like any other quaint cobbled street, a perfect slice of old town history. But as the shadows lengthen, an altogether different story begins to unfold. A story of tragedy, terror, and a spirit that refuses to rest. Let us travel back. The year is 1917 and the world is at war. But the events that transpired on this tiny lane were a private, horrific tragedy for one young woman, Mary Clark. She was described as a beautiful young woman with long flowing blonde hair, which she would treat with a popular flammable hair oil of the time. The event itself took place not on the street, but just inside what would have been a baker's shop, likely near where we're standing now. The townsfolk of the time were apparently allowed to use the baker's ovens to bake their bread to take home. Mary was supposedly baking her usual bread as embers blew out from the oven's chamber, and then the spark. Imagine the scene, a flash, a scream. It was instantly swallowed by panic. There was no time, no stopping it. In a horrific, desperate impulse, she fled the shop, running out into the street. She ran screaming down this very stretch of cobblestones, a figure literally engulfed in flames. Think of the sheer panic, the agony, and the absolute desperation of that moment. Local legends say that as she ran, the neighbourhood dogs were drawn to the chaos, chasing her burning form as she tried to escape the inferno that consumed her. It's a truly visceral image, and it brings us to what people report today. Grape Lane is now one of the most documented spots for paranormal activity in this area. Witnesses and paranormal investigators report 3 distinct phenomena, all tied directly to Mary's tragic end. First, people have seen her apparition, the fleeting ghostly figure of a young woman in flames running down the lane late at night. Second, the sounds. Even on a quiet night, people have reported the distinct, chilling sound of crackling flames, as if a fire is raging just out of sight. And finally, the most unsettling, a sudden, overwhelming and sickening smell of burnt meat. A horrific sensory echo of her demise. Another ghostly legend is that of the old fisherman, a phantom mariner who is said to haunt the harbour. Legend tells of a seasoned sailor who, in a fit of rage, murdered his shipmate on the deck of his vessel and was condemned to a watery grave. His tormented spirit is now said to be forever anchored to the harbour, a solitary figure seen on the foggiest of nights, standing on the piers and staring out at the endless horizon. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadowed past of Whitby. May the ghosts we have spoken of remain only in our stories and not at your bedside. Until next time, sleep tight.